Millions more Americans will soon be eligible for overtime pay. That's because a new rule states that anyone who makes less than $47,476 a year must receive time and a half pay for hours that are worked beyond those 40 hours. This as the Obama administration is spending millions of dollars to help refugees get summer jobs. Joining me now, Gianno, Caldwell, Jillian Melchior, and Diana Furchtgott-Roth. Diana, let me start with you because you've been on top of this more than anybody else for a long time. You kind of saw all of this coming. President Obama ramming a whole lot of legislation through, and for the most part, ultimately, doesn't it hurt more than it helps?
It certainly does. I mean, all these people who now make up to about $47,000 are not going to be allowed to be on salary if they are on salary now. Their employers are going to have to count the hours they work. They're going to have to clock in and clock out to make sure that they don't work more than 40 hours a week. If they do work more than 40 hours a week, which is only about 5 million workers, then they get time and a half. But their wages can be adjusted downwards, so even if they get overtime, they might not, in the end, be making more per year than they are now.
Gianno, I think essentially what President Obama and others have said is that you have these large companies like these chain restaurants who will give someone a title, manager, but not adjust their income, and therefore these managers will work overtime but not make any extra real money for it.
Right. And you know what? That's an argument that I think is a false argument, because this policy is really good for politics, it's bad for business. The Economic Policy Institute had a number of 12.5 million people in which this would impact. That's a large number. I think President Obama at this point wants his legacy to be putting businesses out of business. And I think it's very disappointing because at the end of the day, just like we saw with Obamacare, companies reduce hours, they reduce overhead, and in some cases they reduced they exchanged employees with machines. So this is something I think is going to impact a lot of people, and I can see businesses definitely not bowing by this by getting rid of employees.
You know what, Jillian, speaking of that, we remember that Wendy's thing last week with the kiosk. I looked at their income statement. Over 81% of their income, their money goes to paper, food, employees, and rent. So we can see that the squeeze is going to be pretty obvious.
Yeah, definitely, and particularly within the restaurant industry. I've seen about statistics that 2.2 million workers will be affected. This is such a well-intentioned policy, and it's going to end up hurting exactly the people that it's trying to help. The people on the margins, the people who are just about to get that raise, the people that need good jobs.
Yeah, I don't know how well-intentioned it is. I mean, you probably, you know, I think, again, it's part of the so-called fairness doctrine, and Gianno's right. But on that note, Diana, what about this idea of summer jobs for non-American citizens? Listen, I think one time I dropped the F-bomb on TV. It was because of summer jobs. I feel passionately. Summer jobs, I loved my summer jobs growing up. They taught me a lot about getting into the work ethic. I think that's one of the ways you can get disenfranchised people in this country, very poor people, into the system to learn how to operate it. Why should those jobs go to non-citizens?
Well, I think anyone who's eligible to work and who wants a summer job should be able to have one. The biggest disincentive to having a summer job is these new $13 an hour and $15 an hour minimum wages. No kid is going to be able to get a job with a $15 an hour minimum wage. So I think that one thing we should do is have an exemption for teens, make the minimum wage much lower, have that statewide, all the states, so that these kids can have summer jobs, get that work experience, and then move on to the next level.
Yeah, Gianno, you were shaking your head. You know what I was talking about with that summer job, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I'm from the south side of Chicago, and what's really discouraging about what President Obama is doing here isn't the fact that he's just turning his back on American citizens. He's turning his back on the folks in places like my hometown of Chicago, where Bill O'Reilly rightly pointed out that it's in horrible shape. People don't know this, but many African Americans, 48% of African American men between the ages of 18 and 24 are unemployed. Wouldn't that money be better spent on the south and west sides of Chicago?
Well, I tell you what, it would definitely be better for a young kid to get into the workforce, no matter what the pay is, to get a feel of it, earning money for himself.
Absolutely.
And knowing that there are alternatives besides the gangs and everything else. Guys, you were fantastic.
Absolutely. You hit it on the head.
Really appreciate it. Donald Trump releasing his, well, he's got a list. He just released 11 potential